is over as well. But it didn't end without a bowl victory and on a very high note. Today, we've got our 2021 season recap as we look forward to the start of the Joey Maguire era. All of our season grades, recaps, and MVPs coming up on today's Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. I'm Ryan Mainville. I cover Texas Tech for the Dallas Morning News. I'm joined by my co-host, Emery Lida, a longtime Texas Tech analyst and writer. And as we mentioned in the open, today we've got a football episode. We have been just deep in the grind of hoops for the past few weeks. The last time that we posted a non-basketball episode was January 10th, where we posted our interview with Colin Schooler. And man, as much as Mark Adams has put a team on the floor that is very fun to watch, has been very competitive at the top of the Big 12, I'm excited to talk a little bit of football. We've been removed for a few weeks now, like 4 weeks almost, since the Liberty Bowl. And so it's been some time. We've had some time to collect our thoughts, to collect our grades, and today we bring all of that to the table and we let you know everything that we picked up on over the course of last season.
And I'm so excited to be talking about this football team because we came off of the high of the Liberty Bowl and just the dominant win over Mississippi State, and then just went straight into basketball season, and for good reason. I mean, the basketball team's been excellent. We'll get back to some of that coverage in the coming days, but still, I mean, you talk about a new coaching staff that's brought in a whole lot of energy and some players coming back from last season that ended the year on a real high note. And really, this is the best that I've felt about a Texas Tech football team in the last few years, especially under Matt Wells on the tail end of the Cliff Kingsbury era. There wasn't as much optimism as there is right now. And certainly just seeing all the recruiting victories out there and then also all the returning talent, it's a lot to look forward to, and I'm excited to be breaking down last season today and just looking forward to coming into 2022.
So a little bit of a preface on how this episode is going to work for you, the viewer. We are going to be answering a certain prompt or award. So, for example, our first one is the best win of the 2021 season. Emery and I will each give our own personal opinion, and then we will discuss why we came to the conclusions that we did. It's kind of like the Lock on Texas Tech Dundies, so we hope that you enjoy our awards. And obviously, as I teased beforehand, our first topic is the best win from this 2021 football team, and I've got to go. Without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, really, it's got to be the Liberty Bowl. Just for Texas Tech to, finally snap their bowl losing streak. They hadn't won a bowl game in over, I think 7 years. I think it was 2013. To do it against Mike Leach, to do it against a team that on paper was just poised to be really, really difficult matchup for them. And then to just run the ball like crazy on them after this Mississippi State team really earned its rapport at a national level for being a good run defense. It was incredible. They thrashed Mississippi State, and without a doubt, in my mind, this was the best win for Texas Tech football in 2021.
I'm going to go with a different answer. You went with the end of the season. I'll go with the start of the season, and that's going to be the victory over Houston, which, while it might have ended up a little bit inconsequential in terms of the long-term outlook of the season, this was a game that came into the year with quite a bit of hype. A lot of Houston fans, players, coaches were kind of talking down on Tech. Certainly, you had the whole Dana Holgorsen speech pregame that was very questionable, and then you had them jumping out to, I believe, a 14-0 lead and having really everything go right for them going forward on fourth down. And then the rest of the game, Tech just absolutely crushed Houston. Ended up outscoring them 38-7 down the stretch to win 38-21. Tyler Shuck had a good game. Obviously, Tahj Brooks had a breakout game running the football, and the defense absolutely made Houston's life miserable in the second half. And I believe Clayton Tune ended up throwing 4 interceptions in that one, and it was just a really dominant victory down the stretch. And that Houston team ended up being really good and only lost one other game the entire rest of the season to Cincinnati. So to be able to win against a team of that caliber that has multiple tech transfers on their squad, and then as well as that, just kind of establish a good start to the season, kind of silence a lot of the critics, especially within Houston's program. I think if you look at overall feel, I would say maybe the Liberty Bowl is a little bit better, but in terms of pure football, X's and O's, what was the biggest upset? I'd say it's probably Houston looking back on it.
That's a really good pick, and for a lot of these, I have a note to let my close second be known, and Houston was a close second for me. I felt like for this win, especially at the beginning of the season, it just really set the tone for what this football team was going to be about. There were a lot of questions of, is Texas Tech going to perform with all the transfers that they added in the offseason? What's Tyler Shuck going to look like? What's the defense going to be like? And, I feel like they crossed all those boxes off. Obviously, there were plenty of ups and downs from there, but Houston game is a great, great pick. Unfortunately, it was not always sweet for Texas Tech. They did have a couple of really bad losses on the year, and so our next, I guess it's an award. It's more like hopefully like a discard button for the worst loss of 2021. For me, it's got to be the Texas game. Red Raiders just got thrashed. Texas just absolutely blew them out of the building, ran all over them. It was just not enjoyable to watch. I think that you could make maybe an argument that Henry Colombi added some fireworks in that second half as he came in and tried to stop the bleeding. But this game was just hard to watch, man. I think I when I was covering the game, I had most of my recap written by the third quarter because Texas Tech was already down by like 25 points. Just without a doubt, this game was really hard to finish.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the TCU game that happened a couple of weeks later. And I think the key there for me is it was at home. It was a game that Tech had quite a bit of hype behind. It was Tech were throwbacks. There was night game, primetime game on ESPN, I think it was. And Tech just straight up got demolished. That was one of the games where they didn't look like they belonged on the same field as TCU. You look at the rushing stats from TCU in that game. They ended up with 394 yards rushing, over 8 yards a carry. They had multiple backs go over 100 yards, and Zach Evans had 143 yards in the first half and then didn't even play in the second. So for me, that TCU game was really an embarrassment because Texas, when Tech played against Texas, it was seen as Texas was a good team at the time. They seemed like they were going to be a team that was going to be an 8 or 9 win team and was going to have a fair bit of success. Obviously, that didn't end up happening. I think that the meltdown post Red River rivalry was very telling, but certainly that game was at least somewhat understandable. But the TCU game getting just absolutely whooped and getting ran all over, I think that has to be the worst game, and I think it started to raise a lot of doubts about Matt Wells and his tenure.
Yeah, that game was not fun to watch either. It actually was not my close second. My close second probably would have been the Oklahoma State game. Just to get blanked at Texas Tech is just it's not normal, and it was not fun to watch. But yeah, enough with the bad. Let's go to the good. Our favorite moment of the 2021 season for me, the Garvey 62-yarder, man. What else is there to it? Just an absolutely iconic moment in Texas Tech history.
No question. I think it's Garvey's kick, and I don't think it's particularly close. The trajectory changed for the season, and to hit a kick from 62 yards is just ridiculous.
One of the most incredible Texas Tech moments, and really sports moments, I've witnessed live in my entire life. We'll end this first segment on a little bit of a low note, our least favorite moment of the season. Mine's got to be the fourth quarter collapse against Kansas State. That was just brutal, and a lot of good came from it. You could argue that, we got a fresh start with the Texas Tech football program. That was kind of the final straw for this staff, and there was progress made because of it. But just watching a game that was very winnable, Texas Tech really felt like the better team, and just to absolutely collapse in every single facet, it was just unbearable. So for me, it's that second half collapse against Kansas State.
I'll go ahead and say Tyler Shuck getting injured against Texas, because up to that point, I at least felt like they had a chance in that game. And Shuck getting injured really took a lot of the wind out of the sails and really made us reevaluate the season. And it was a shame we never got to see him again after that.
It's an interesting pick. I like that. I hadn't thought about that. But coming up in our next segment, we are going to be talking about some specific players and also looking at the offensive and defense side of the ball. But first, a word from our sponsors. Hey, Red Raiders, this is Ryan with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about, GetUpside. My listeners are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free GetUpside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon cash back or more on your first fill up. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using GetUpside. Just download the app for free and use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free GetUpside app and use promo code SCORE to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's code SCORE. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours are about getting fit or eating healthier, be sure that you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolutions because it tastes so good you're going to want to eat it. It's not like other protein bars, which can be chalky or waxy or just taste like chemicals. You want to eat healthy, but like by week 3, you're probably just thinking this is not worth it. Where's the chocolate? Well, guess what? Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. And there are so many flavors to choose from. You've got coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and many more. In fact, Built is always coming out with new limited time flavors, so be sure to check out Built.com often to see what's new. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com today. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are here recapping the 2021 Texas Tech football season, and we just mentioned some of our favorite games and our favorite moments from the season. Now we're going to look at the positions on offense, defense, and special teams and give them a letter grading. And so you got to start with the offense. I mean, come on, this is a Texas Tech podcast. And for me, I felt like there was a lot of improvements, even with Tyler Shuck getting injured, Henry Colombi stepping up, playing a very good first half of football, and then just kind of becoming just really like a game manager for the rest of the year. The run game had some bumps, but there was a lot of positives. I was really happy with how the Texas Tech offense played this season. I think that there were a lot of things that could have been done better, but overall, I'm going to give this offense a B- on the year. I thought that they adjusted to injuries really well. The running game was deep. Other receivers stepped up as Uzukama was limited, and I just thought that it was very adaptable and very versatile. Obviously, you got shut out. That was probably the low point of the season, but overall, I think Texas Tech stayed very malleable and played a really good season on offense.
I think the one thing that bothers me about the offense from last season was just the inconsistencies. I mean, you had a half against Kansas State that was just a complete disaster. You had the Oklahoma State game where you didn't score anything. You had the Baylor game where it took 3.5 quarters basically to get anything going offensively. And there's just so many inconsistencies over the course of the season. There were definitely high points. The Iowa State game, I think, was probably the best offensive game Tech was able to play all year against good opponents. And it was just far too often it felt like Tech was kind of out of rhythm and took multiple quarters to get into rhythm, or sometimes just lost rhythm after a quarter. And unfortunately, I think that the offense showed a lot of promise. I think that Sonny Cumbie did a good job in terms of making sure the offense was balanced and had some good play calls. Certainly the run game was a welcome surprise this season, but I just think the amount of inconsistencies makes it hard for me to give them a good grade. I'll go with a C+ because I think there were some positives, just not necessarily enough to make me want to grade them overly high.
The inconsistencies is definitely a fair point to kind of draw the line and plant your stake, because this team really did struggle to put it together for games on end, and that was probably one of the reasons why they found themselves with an even record heading into bowl season. But Got to take a look at the defensive end. Not always the catalyst for a Texas Tech team, but I thought there was a lot of good on the defensive end with this Texas Tech team. A lot of really good individual components, especially we'll talk about our MVPs here in a second. But I think overall, the Texas Tech defense, that stretch where they struggled to defend the run was really, really ugly. That game against SFA and just giving up that many passing yards to a just a team that you should have beaten by 30 points. I gotta go C minus for this Texas Tech defense. I think that there's a lot to like. I think that there's a lot that bodes well for the future, but I don't know. Just watching them on the field, it's difficult for me to kind of give them anything higher than a C minus at this point.
Yeah, the SFA game was actually the only game over the last like 3 or 4 seasons that I have not watched in at least half of it because I saw a quarter and it was just painful. And I think that over the course of the season, the Tech defense had some real struggles at times. Certainly the TCU, the Texas games, those stick out. And the Oklahoma game, Caleb Williams was able to get whatever he wanted offensively and through the air. But there were a lot of positives to come from the season. I mean, Oklahoma State, yeah, Tech's offense got shut out, but defensively, that was a masterpiece. Against Mississippi State, only allowing 7 points to a Mike Leach team was really impressive. Certainly Baylor, the defense kept you in it. Against Iowa State, the defense had a really good start to the game. Like over the course of the season, there were a lot of positives. Again, the Houston game after the first 2 drives, only allowing 7 points. Like there's a lot of moments in the season that other Texas Tech teams simply haven't had. I think that across the board, Tech's defense took a step up. And we're really, if we grade it on a curve, which I'm not going to, I think you would have to say that was very impressive and worthy of like an A. But just looking at it in a vacuum, I think I'll have to go with a B minus because I just think that you had 3 really rough games with Oklahoma, TCU, and Texas, but there were enough good moments to where I think it evens out, and especially considering how they finished up the year against Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Mississippi State, there are a lot of room for optimism there.
Yeah, compared to the mean of past Texas Tech defenses, this season was a lot better. Special teams, not an area you might have been expecting us to grade, but we're going to do it anyways. I'm going to give the special teams group a C+. Specialists were phenomenal. Really, really good. McNamara and Garvey might be the 2 best specialist like duo in the Big 12. Really, really good special team specialists, but overall, the special teams units were just a disaster at times, and it really cost Texas Tech games and moments. And that was kind of the trend with Tom Dahl special teams units when he was in Lubbock. Obviously, he is gone now, and Kenny Perry, I believe, is the new special teams coordinator at Texas Tech. But yeah, for me, the specialists really, really good. I want to give this group a good grade, but unfortunately, the schemes, the blocking, the returns, the decisions on the returns, it's just too much for me to be willing to hand out a good grade here.
All right, so I have Garvey and McNamara basically raising Tech's grade by a grade and a half each. So that means that the worst possible grade they can get is a C+, because those 2 were probably top 10 in the nation in terms of their individual production. So you can't grade them too low. So if it was just those 2, it'd be an A+. However, I'm going to give the team a C+, because if you look at the punt returns, I mean, for one, Tech only called 5 fair catches the entire season on punt returns, and yet somehow ended up with less than 200 yards returning punts. And you had multiple muffs. You had a bunch of penalties on the special teams. The coverage was decent at times, but also allowed quite a few big returns, or at a minimum returns that were into positive territory. I think throughout the season, Tech was never all that good in field position. So for me, the return grades are an absolute disaster, and you ended up with really never finding a consistent punt or kick returner to utilize. But Garvey and McNamara, and also shout out to Trey Wolf. I think he did a really good job as a kickoff specialist. But outside of those 3 guys, I mean, everything else that could go wrong did go wrong throughout the season. So C+, just average.
Yeah, specialists were really, really good, which makes that grade really, really difficult to give out, but it is what it is. Offensive MVP. Mine was really, really close to not being this person, but it ended up being him anyways, and that is Donovan Smith. I felt like his presence in the starting lineup just kind of changed this team, and I probably would not have been giving him the MVP if it were not for his performance in the Liberty Bowl. I felt like that was kind of the final nail in the coffin for me to give him this award. I was really, really worried about how he would play in this game, and he looked like a veteran quarterback in this one. So I'm going to go Donovan Smith, which I'm sure is a little bit of an interesting pick, but I'm excited to hear yours.
Yeah, I mean, Donovan Smith is a bit unconventional given that he only started about a third of the season. But I mean, I like it. I think if you look over the last few games, Smith really came into his own. The Iowa State game was excellent for him, as was the Liberty Bowl. I'm going to go with Tahj Brooks, though. I think if you look at the way he started the season with back-to-back 100-yard games, really any game that he was healthy, he ended up being the lead back and taking a lot of the load. And we came into the season expecting Sir Roderick Thompson, whenever he got healthy, to kind of be the workhorse that he was in 2019 and 2020. But that never really ended up being the case. And Brooks, I mean, is a guy that averaged 6.5 yards per carry. His impact in the screen game and out of the backfield, it was at least somewhat useful. And then certainly, I mean, you have the highlight performances. You have a big run against Iowa State. Certainly in the Liberty Bowl, he was really important. So I think Brooks had the injury in the middle of the season that makes it difficult to give it to him. But over the course of a year, I have to say that he was, at a minimum, probably the most explosive player on this Tech offense. And I would argue that if you look at the body of work, no one else really was consistent whenever they got time.
Brooks was second on my ballot. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him later. But on the defensive end of the ball, this was probably the most difficult position for me to come up with just one name for. And I'm actually going to go with Tyree Wilson. I think that he was just so good on the defensive line. He caused a ton of pressure on opposing quarterbacks, finished the year with 7 sacks, 13.5 tackles for a loss. I'll say that my really, really close second was Adrian Taylor Emerson. The Rabbit, I thought that he had a phenomenal season in the secondary, but I got to go Tyree Wilson, man. And I know that we just had Colin Schooler on the show, and got to give a lot of love to him. But what Tyree Wilson did on the defensive line this season, Texas Tech just needed it so badly.
Man, stealing my pick and stealing my number 2 that I was about to mention. I had Tyree Wilson as well. I think his disruption on the defensive line was something that we haven't seen at Tech since Pete Robertson back in the day, and obviously Brandon Jackson as well as that. But outside of Tyree Wilson, Adrian Taylor Emerson did a really good job in coverage. Once Muddy Waters went down against, I believe it was Texas, the rest of the season, Emerson really played extremely well. And I think that, I mean, you have to look at him as one of the cornerstones of this defense going forward. And certainly he had good amount of interceptions this season in coverage. He played well as both a safety and at times having to play kind of a nickel role. But certainly those two would be my top 2 choices. But since you mentioned both of them, I'm going to go as the third guy, being Eric Monroe. And he was really a surprising pick for me because I think coming into the season, he was someone that was quite a bit sketchy, had a kind of rough 2020 season, but he really played consistently well over the course of the year. Had a huge step up in run support, a lot fewer missed tackles this season, into the year off with interception, just had a generally nice season and a nice way to end off his college career.
You're on your own on that one, man. But coming up in our last season, we will wrap up with a few more individual awards. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. It's a new year, and there is a new and updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, wrapping up our Texas Tech conclusion and season awards with a few more individual players that we wanted to highlight. We're going to start off by sharing our newcomer of the year, so a player that was not on Texas Tech's roster last season and had a good year this year. For me, this was probably the easiest award for me. And for me, it's got to be Kailyn Geiger. I thought that he had a phenomenal season. It's just a total shot that Texas Tech doesn't get another year out of this guy. But I thought that he was really, really good. 550 receiving yards on the season. Crazy that he only had one touchdown in his Texas Tech career. One receiving touchdown, which is nuts.
It's wild to me.
If the value that he provided outside of the end zone was phenomenal, though, and I felt like in the place of Ezukama struggling and kind of disappearing as he was dealing with that nagging injury, Geiger was just phenomenal.
Yeah, I think Geiger's versatility offensively ended up being extremely valuable. But since you already mentioned him and I want to bring up more people, I'm going to go ahead and go with Rashad Williams as another guy to look at as a newcomer. And I think both him and Muddy Waters had the potential to be really good this season in the secondary as newcomers. But certainly, obviously, Waters got hurt early on in the season. I don't think Williams was perfect by any means. He certainly had a few games that were kind of rough on the coverage end. But in run support, he was a very dependable corner. And as well as that, I think he came along as the season went on, and his length on the outside made him a valuable piece to have, and certainly was kind of a difference maker compared to corners in the past for Tech that have kind of struggled against more physical receivers. And so that was a welcome strength to have. But certainly for me, Geiger would probably be the number one guy.
Williams, and then I think I was even considering Reggie Pearson for a little bit there. I thought that he was really, really good. Pass coverage was sketchy at times, but I really liked what he did in the run game.
I think we're on opposite ends on the two safeties that we've mentioned.
Man, our safeties are polarizing us. I'm interested on our discussion here, but all right, most improved player. Say it in unison. Got to be Tahj Brooks, right?
Yeah, it's got to be Tahj Brooks. Simple
without a doubt. 3.7 yards per carry as a freshman, 6.5 this year. Led the team in rushing to overcome Sir Roderick Thompson, who's done that for 2 straight years, is phenomenal. Nearly tripled his rushing total from a year before. Got in the end zone 7 times. I mean, this guy's a problem, and he's going to be probably even better next season. I don't know how that's possible, but this guy's a player, man. He's a player.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Brooks is far and away the most improved player. I mean, unless you want to maybe count Donovan Smith and say, well, he redshirted last year, he couldn't have been that good if Alan Bowman and Henry Columbia were both above him. But yeah, I mean, looking at on-field production, when Tahj Brooks goes from under 4 yards a carry 1 year to 6.5 the next year, mind you, that's 6.5 against some pretty good run defenses. Houston, even though they're a group of 5, their run defense is still pretty decent. You had Mississippi State in the Liberty Bowl. Yeah, they were missing a couple of guys, but that's still one of the best run defenses in the nation, and he just absolutely torched them. And over the course of the season, I mean, he had a bit of explosiveness that I did not see coming into the year. So Brooks is by far the most improved player for me, and I don't think it's even close.
Yeah, a guy that I was kind of considering for a little bit outside of Brooks was, goodness, who was I thinking of? Muddy Waters. I thought that he, very limited time. We only got to see him play a couple of games before he went down with injury, but I really, really liked the way that he played in pass coverage for Texas Tech. But most likely candidate for a breakout season in 2022. That's my segue. I'm going Muddy Waters. I think that a fully healthy Muddy Waters, the fact that he chose to return to Texas Tech is huge. Wanted to give this to Brooks, but I'm going to go Waters.
All right, so I'm going to say that I'm predicting a Tahj Brooks 1,000-yard season next season.
Ooh, and a Zach Kittley offense?
I think it's possible because I think he's going to end up being a workhorse in between the 20s. I think Sir Roderick Thompson might take some of the touchdowns, but I think people underestimate how Kittley can adapt his offense, and the fact that basically Houston Baptist's entire team ended up at Western Kentucky played a lot into how pass dependent they were. But I've got faith in Kittley utilizing the personnel. But I mean, we'll see about that. That's a bit of a hot take. But in terms of my actual most likely for a breakout, I'm going to go with JJ Sparkman. I think if you look down the stretch of last season, towards the end of the year, his connection with Donovan Smith, he had a touchdown in the Oklahoma game, a touchdown in the Liberty Bowl, and really was doing so on not all that many snaps. I mean, he hardly played 100 snaps coming into the bowl game. He's someone that really has a lot of the physical traits that you love to see out of an outside wide receiver, and in a Kitley offense, I think you're going to see him being utilized more in the open field. And I mean, just looking at some of the tape, I think his route running is a lot better than some people have given him credit for. And he is going to be someone that is going to be tall, able to win those contested routes. And when you consider the fact that he'll be an open offense, and really his competition on the outside is going to be like a Trey Cleveland. Obviously, on the other end, you have maybe like a Fonji and a Jaron Bradley, but I think Sparkman's going to be probably the best of that group. And I'm going to take a little bit of a devil's advocate approach to the Muddy Waters pick and say he was already a major starter at Duke and played a whole lot of snaps there. So I think in terms of breakout there, I'm going to say it might be a little bit difficult. But if I had a second guy to choose, I'd go with Adrian Taylor Emerson, because I truly think that if you see the improvement that he made towards the end of the season this year, and he gets full coverage coming into the season and gets a lot of snaps, I think that you can see the next evolution of him being one of the most versatile secondary options in the Big 12.
That's a good note on Muddy, and I like that you switched a little bit there, because all the attention was on Muddy Waters coming into the season, and what is this guy going to bring to the secondary? There's all this hype. Obviously, he goes down with injury, so he didn't have a ton of time to prove himself, but other guys stepped up in big ways in Texas Tech secondary. So I like your pick. Maybe I'd flip mine to Tahj Brooks, or Sparkman's a good pick. Miles Price, maybe? I don't know, man. A 1,000-yard rusher in Zach Hitley's offense sounds really intriguing to me. Who was the last 1,000-yard rusher at Tech? Do you know? Is it Washington?
It was DeAndre Washington. Stockton could have gotten there in 2017, but he got injured down the stretch. But I mean, I think it's possible, and I would definitely say Miles Price is one that I kind of maybe overlooked. But if you look at the way Price ended the season, I mean, he was the number one option for the last 5 weeks of the year, if you look at it from a pure reception basis. And I mean, in the Kitley offense, dependent on the slot, I could see Price putting up some monster numbers, especially with that position kind of being thinned out a little bit.
Yeah, he's definitely playing primarily at receiver next season. I have no doubt about that. And I think that Xavier White might get some of that too. We'll see what happens.
I'm excited for that. I'm telling you, 2019 Xavier White in the slot, very underrated.
It's going to happen, man, especially with Joshua Moore heading to SMU. I think that we're going to have to see some things get shuffled around. But we'll end our episode with our overall MVPs for the 2021 season. A lot of pivotal players on this Texas Tech team. You could go Henry Colombi if you wanted to. You could go Colin Schooler if you wanted to. You could go Tyree Wilson if you wanted to. You could go Krishawn Merriweather. There's a ton of names. I'm going Donovan Smith, man. I thought that his ability to just come into that Liberty Bowl. The Liberty Bowl is what did it for me, man. Texas Tech was hurting for a bowl win. They were hurting for one. And Donovan Smith had played like a freshman in so many games last season and just was inconsistent and struggled at times. But for him to pull it together in the Iowa State game and the Liberty Bowl, two of the biggest wins that Texas Tech has had in the last few years, and I think he was the most important part of that, you know, besides Garvey kicking a 62-yard field goal. But for value's sake, I got to go Donovan Smith. But I will say, Tyree Wilson is a close second for me here. What he did on the defensive line, I mean, you want to talk about value. Texas Tech, he was more valuable than anybody, maybe at any other position. So he's a really close second. And I see you shaking your head at me for my Donovan Smith pick. And so I'm interested if you think that I should flip to Tyree Wilson and stake my flag in the ground.
I think Smith played like 5 games the entire season. I mean, I get it, because at the same time, you look at the 2 most important wins of the season, Iowa State and Mississippi State, from a pure culture building standpoint. And Donovan Smith was central in both of those, and certainly has a good argument to being quarterback of the future, the best quarterback that played for Tech this season. But man, I mean, Tyree Wilson was a monster. I mean, his consistent production in terms of putting up sacks, getting in the backfield, he had more pressures than anyone else on the defensive line, and it wasn't even close. And just in general, his ability to wreak havoc against the pass rusher is something that Tech hasn't had in years. So I think that's kind of my rational pick, and I would encourage you to go on board, just because I personally have a hard time giving it to someone that played 5 games. But in the same token, I mean, I understand. I think that Donovan Smith was electric at times and certainly has a bright future. And to be honest, my second place is the kicker, Jonathan Garvey. I mean,
It's a good pick. It's a good pick. Talk about value.
You want to talk about one of the best players in the nation at his position. How many other guys can you really say that for Tech? That's the one thing that really goes for Garvey outside of the obvious, the 62-yard kick. He was a top 5 kicker by pretty much any metric this year. Hit the longest game-winning field goal in NCAA history. Didn't miss a kick until potentially sending it into overtime against Baylor. So you have all of those things going for him, but I think I have to go with Tyree Wilson just because of positional value. And if you look across the board, offensively, no one really played enough games healthy to be an outright offensive MVP unless you want to argue someone on the offensive line or maybe like a Kailyn Geiger. But again, then Geiger was obviously not the most productive at his position. That'd be Ezra Kama. So there's just kind of a lack of options offensively and defensively. I think it's Tyree Wilson without much of a doubt.
It's a great pick. It's one that I want to make, but Donovan Smith, he didn't play in 5 games. He played in 9 games. You're forgetting about read option dominant Donovan Smith, man.
Come on, he started in 5. If you want to talk about playing in 9 games, you could just say, well, when you're on the field for less than 10 snaps in a game or less than 15 snaps in a game, how can you be the most valuable piece?
How many passing attempts do you think it's been since his last interception?
I actually think I looked at this. I think is it 121?
It's more than 80. That's all I know. Didn't have a single interception in his last 3 games. That was the biggest issue for Columbia. I felt like to make that switch to go with the redshirt freshman. I don't know, man. I liked it. It was gutsy.
I respect it.
You know what? My MVP is Sonny Cumbie. There we go.
Fair enough. I'll
put up my flag. Sonny Cumbie, interim head coach, is my MVP.
Greatest
mentality. That's my final pick. No more going back on that one. Emory will not talk me out of that one. Hot Take Central, season MVP, gotta be Sonny Cumbie. Thank you all for tuning in to an absolute bombshell of a Texas Tech season recap episode. We went long today, and so we hope that you enjoyed all of our hot takes, and we definitely enjoyed talking about football for once. It was a good change of pace. We've got some more coverage to do this week, man. We've got a few more days until Texas Tech plays basketball again, so we've got to start taking a look at Mississippi State. We've got to start prepping for the February 1st matchup because that is a week from today, and it is going to be mayhem in Lubbock in a week. I cannot wait. We will have plenty of coverage for that. In the meantime, you can keep up with us on social. You can follow me at rmainvillelbk. You can follow Emory at eraser41, and you can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech Twitter page at Locked On TTU. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can see all of that on your screen right now. If you aren't, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn your notifications on for us so that you get notified whenever an episode goes live and you can come tune in. In the meantime, thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Now be sure to make your second listen Locked On Bets your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.